Hey everyone, my name is Ajay, and in this series, we are going to talk about Azure VNets. So basically, we will compare the virtual networking versus the traditional networking, how virtual networks are provisioned, and how they are different from the traditional VLAN, what we configure on the router and switches. Let's get started. So first of all, our concept of the container should be very clear. So here on my screen, you can see I have chosen a network which is going to be class A 10.10.0.0/16. So 10.10, this is going to be reserved. Net mask is going to be 255.255.0.0. So let's talk about an example of hub. Let's say at home you are having the hub device. Simply you connect two machines, a laptop 1 and laptop 2, and you can assign IPs from same range of subnet, and these machines can talk to each other. This hub is going to support a broadcast domain. Very similarly, if you are having a requirement of multi-subnet, so from this network slash 16, I have taken a network 10.10.1.0/24, which is going to be the part of the VLAN 1. Another network I have taken 10.10.2.0, which is going to be a part of the VLAN 2. So you need some sort of L3 device in between, which is going to be your switch. It's a L3 switch. It will provision you the communication between two subnets. Whenever you are going to provision some sort of network, there's a requirement for IP address. So there are two type of IP addresses available for use. One is going to be globally unique, which is we call the public IP address, and there are some ranges defined. So you can guess whether it's a private IP address or public IP address. So let's talk about the public IP address first. So there are ranges class A, class B, class C, class D, and E. So for class A, the range is going to be from 1 to 126 with the subnet mask of 255.0.0.0. Similarly, you have a class B. Range start from 128 to 191. For class C, the range start from 192 to 223. And there's a class D, that's for the multicasting. Class E is experimental. So between the class A and class B, you see a gap. So 127 is reserved for loop back testing purpose. This IP cannot be used anywhere else. And from here, there are few IP addresses, those are reserved for the private use. So if you go and read the RFC 1918, it defines you have a class A private range, which is going to be 10.0.0.0/8, from class B 172.16.0.0/12, and from class C 192.168.0.0/16. These are the ranges privately can be used by anybody and or maybe by any of the organization. Similarly, whenever you these we talk about the public IP address, they are something owned by the organization, and whenever you want to request a range for the public IP address, you need to go to a registered body. So let's assume you are in Asia Pacific region, so you need to reach out to APNIC to get the ranges allocated. Similarly, if you are in US, Canada, you need to reach out to ORIN to get your IP address registered. We already talked about the VLAN and IP ranges. Now let's take a look how the Azure virtual infrastructure looks like. So VNet is like a traditional network VLAN that you would operate in your own data center network, but bring with it additional benefit of Azure infrastructure such as scale, availability, and isolation. So these VNets or virtual network can be provisioned with the access of your Azure subscription. So I'm assuming you have the Azure subscription, and let's try to provision one of the VNet, which is going to be the single VNet in this case. So whenever I'm going to provision any virtual network, I need to choose a region in Azure, and there are multiple regions. So whatsoever is close to you, probably you want to provision your virtual network on that region and availability zone. So this is my container here, 10.10.00/16, and I need to carve multiple subnets from it here. So my private range, it is going to be 10.10.3.0. My public range, it is going to be 10.10.1.0. My application subnet is going to be 10.10.4.0. I want to put my web application in 10.10.5.0, and my gateway subnet is going to be 10.10.2.0/24. These are all /24 subnets which I carved, but this is my example. If you want to go for a bigger subnet or a smaller subnet, you can still use this as per your requirement. So the smallest subnet you can go for is going to be 29/29. Now let's talk about the isolation. Within a VNet, all these subnets, they are supposed to talk to each other. So you will have all the communication, and any subnet can talk to any subnet. But when it comes to the isolation, it gives you a flexibility to provision the network security. So you can restrict some of the communication which you don't want to happen between those two subnets. You also have flexibility to adjust these subnets. You have flexibility to create multiple VNets. So we are going to talk in detail how these things are going to talk to each other and what you need as a best practice to provision your VNets. As I mentioned earlier, the VNets are tied with the region. So let's assume you have a requirement and you want to do some sort of the isolation between the networks. Because within a VNet, all the subnets, they can talk to each other. So in this situation, you try to create two VNets. So one VNet with a range of 10.20.0.0/16, and another VNet you want to create with a range of 10.30.0.0/16. That's another container basically. And in this situation, you created the same sort of subnets, or you call it a VLAN. VLAN 1, which is private, VLAN 2, which is the application, VLAN 3 is a web, and VLAN 4 is gateway, and last VLAN 5 is a public. So you want to replicate the same scenario in a different network. So you created second VNet also with a range of 1030. Now you have two networks in a same region with two VNets. So technically, considering the security and isolation, these VNets are not going to talk to each other by default. And the reason behind, if you really want to communicate, then why you would go for the isolation? It does not mean they cannot talk to each other, but you need to provision some extra steps to make it work. So I have my same subscription, which is a subscription one. Subscription one. I mean, you are accessing the same subscription, but you created two VNets basically. Now, if you want to provision a communication between both the VNets, though they are in the same region, you need to provision a gateway. So gateway subnet is nothing, but it's a carving of some subnet from the same container basically. So here we created a VNet gateway subnet, which is 10.22.0. And the same thing we did on the second VNet, 10.30.2.0. So you need to provision a gateway. So when you provision the gateway, they can talk to each other. So there are two ways. Either you go for VNet to VNet peering, or you go for the kind of the VPNs. On my screen, you can see this time we created two VNets, but those are going to be in two different regions. Again, the same situation is applicable. You need to create the gateway. And in this time, this peering is not going to be regional, but it is going to be the global peering. No matter where your resources resides, but you can set up your VNet to VNet peering, and the backbone infrastructure of Microsoft is going to be used. This is the third scenario. You have two subscriptions. In a one subscription, I have provisioned a VNet 1, and in my second subscription, I provision VNet 2. Even though there's some going to be the authentication, but VNet to VNet peering can also be established. Let's talk about some of the concept of region, availability zone, and the data centers. So regions are basically based on the geography. So here I can say this is my first region, which is US East. And whenever Microsoft deploy, they deploy in a pair. So this can be your US West. And within the region, you are going to have availability zones. And availability zones can have multiple data centers within. When we talk about a communication which is going to happen, they are going to have a very high speed link between these regions, and all the traffic between the resources in paired virtual network uses the Microsoft backbone infrastructure. Let's talk about the steps to create a VNet. So on my screen, you can see I need to go and create a resource. So I have chosen a virtual network. This is my subscription. I need to put a name of the resource group. If you have already existing one, you can choose that, or you can go ahead and create the new one. You need to give the instance name. So this is my first network, which I want to provision a single VNet. So I have given the name VNet1. Now I need to choose a region. In this case, I have chosen a region which is going to be Asia Pacific, Central India. In the next step, I need to define the range of my container. So it is going to be 10.10.0.0/16. It also supports IPv6, but in this video, we are only going to talk about IPv4. Now I need to add the subnets. So you need to carve some subnets, some IP ranges from your container. So my first subnet is going to be private, second public, application, web, and VNet gateway. But right hand side, you can see there are some security settings also. I'm not going to touch any of them as of now. When you hit the create button, it is going to do some sort of the validation. So validation is something based on what is your subscription, what is your VNet resource group, your VNet name, your region, and the IP container space you provided, and then number of subnets you want to provision. Here in the screen, you can see running the final validation. Once your validation is passed, you are going to see the green check mark on the top. And now you need to hit the create button to provision your resources. Now this deployment has been created. We can see a green mark here, and your resources are ready for the review. While creating Azure VNets, there are some limitations also which we should know. So the first limitation, the number of virtual network you can create. By default, you can provision 1000 virtual networks, and subnet per virtual network is going to be 3000. Though these limits can be tweaked, you need to open attack case with Microsoft Azure. You can create VNets with same address space in two different regions. For example, US East, US West, but because of the same address space, they cannot talk to each other. This is a same concept what we use with our traditional network as well. Another point we need to keep in mind, Azure does not support any layer 2 semantics. Multicast and broadcast are also not supported. While we provision our VNets, there are going to be some reservation for addresses. So from 0 to 3 and the last address for the subnet is going to be reserved for your Azure services. So when we talked about the reservation, your dot 0 is going to be your network address. Dot 1 is reserved by Azure for your default gateway. Dot 2 and dot 3 reserved by Azure to map the Azure DNS IP to your VNet space. And the last IP is going to be your broadcast. There are a couple of things you need to keep in mind that you cannot ping the default gateway within your VNet. You cannot use traceroute for your diagnostic purpose. It does not mean that you're not going to have any tool which works based on the ICMP as we did earlier in your traditional network troubleshooting. Most of the time when there's a network issue, we do a ping, we do a trace route. Here, you need to rely on TCP-based ping and TCP-based trace route. So those are the utility you need to download on your machine to perform the same test. But regular ICMP based ping and trace route is not going to work. Then next thing, you can add, remove, expand or shrink a subnet if there are no VMs or services deployed within it. A VNet is tied with a single region. You cannot move services in and out of the VNets. In the resource what we provision, if you go to the resource and choose the subnets, you can see all the subnets what we have provisioned so far. And it is also going to tell you the available IP address. So these are the IP addresses can be assigned to the host within the network. If you go to the network diagram tab, you can see this is my resource group. This is my VNet. If you have multiple VNets, you can choose from the drop down. It is going to tell you how it is provisioned. So all the subnets what we created, they are part of the VNet one. Thank you everyone for watching. I will see you in the next video.